Welcome to the Binge Eating Disorder Workshop Series, HAES, Hope for the New Year. My name is Danny Gillity, the Executive Director at the Eating Disorder Foundation, and I am delighted to welcome everyone here tonight. Today's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with the Eating Disorder Foundation and Eating Recovery Center, Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. The Eating Disorder Foundation was founded in 2003 with a mission to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through free and accessible education, support, and advocacy. We are a Denver-based organization that is now serving individuals and families both nationally and internationally. And now I want to introduce Alex Harrison, ERC's Alumni and Family Liaison, to share a few words.
All right. Hi, everybody. Like Danny said, I'm Alex Harrison, and I'm an alumni and family liaison with Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Behavioral Health. Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight provide treatment at all levels of care for those struggling with eating disorders and also mood and anxiety diagnoses. We also provide a host of free resources and support and education, and I'll quickly tell you about a couple of those events. One thing that we are sponsoring is a bingo night that is going to be held, let's see, oh, I lost my screen for just a second.
February 10th.
Yes, February 10th, thank you. And we're partnering with EDF in this event. It's going to be a night for alumni, friends and family, community members. Everyone is welcome to join. I think I'll send probably the link to Danny and have her pop it into the chat box for everyone to see if they want to register. And in, not that many weeks from now, March 3rd, we are going to be, again, partnering with the Eating Disorder Foundation and also the Colorado Community Collaborative for Eating Disorders to host Dr. Christine Neff, who is a researcher, author, and speaker who is really just a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research. And she is going to be speaking to us in a virtual event, like I said, on March 3rd from 6 to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And we can, again, send you a link in the chat box if you're interested in participating in that as well. And I'm just so thankful that Meredith is with us here tonight. And I think if you're raring to go, you can take it away.
All right.
Or Danny, did you want to introduce her?
Thank you, Alex. And yeah, you can find more about both of our organizations, and I'll put the links in the chat. So this evening, if you have questions for our presenter, I invite you to use the chat feature to communicate with me directly throughout the workshop. The chat is kept confidential and will come to me directly. We will save time for Q&A after the presentation, and I'll deliver those questions to Meredith. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we'll include them in our follow-up email. We will not be sharing the PowerPoint. However, we are recording tonight, and we will send you the recording as soon as possible. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Meredith Nisbet is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified eating disorder specialist. She is currently the supervisor of the clinical response team with ERC and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center, where she engages with patients, families, and providers seeking admission nationwide. In addition to her work with ERC Pathlight and her private practice, Three Birds Counseling, Meredith provides education and training on weight stigma and health at every size informed care around the country. Meredith earned her bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and her master's degree from East Carolina University. Meredith resides in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she spends her free time listening to true crime podcasts, practicing hot yoga, and snuggling with her dog, Mac. So thank you, Meredith, so much for being here, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with you all tonight. Before we get started, I always like to give a note on language. If you've never seen me present before, this is what I do before every talk, just so that you know what to expect from me during this presentation. So during this presentation, I will use several different words of describing bodies. My preferred words of describing bodies are person of size, person in a larger body, and then I use the word fat as a neutral descriptor rather than in a derogatory way. So similar to tall or short, old or young, things like that. You certainly don't have to identify with any of those terms. Those are just my preferred terms, but those are what I tend to use when presenting and talking about folks in larger bodies. There's a reason that I stay away from these words on the right, these no thanks words, fat, obviously when used derogatorily, but also obese or obesity. And the reason for that is because the words obese and obesity are rooted in the medicalization and pathologization of bodies, where we're really reducing people to their body size and pathologizing them for that. And these words are really often very triggering for folks in larger bodies who have had negative, not just negative healthcare experiences, but negative experiences in the world based on the body that they live in. I know that the word fat as a neutral descriptor or as a positive word is often a foreign concept to folks. And I always want to reach out to the folks who have had that word used against them and have, trauma or a trigger for that word, and just to let you know, it's okay if you don't identify that way, if you don't prefer that word. This is something that varies person to person, and these are just my own personal preferences. So January is a tough time for a lot of us, right? Because the messaging of new year, new you is just everywhere. It's incessant. So we're bombarded with this pressure to be better, look better, feel better from all of these external sources. And it really drowns out our internal guidance. Marketing is a powerful thing. And the goal of marketing is to sell you the next quick fix or this ultimate key to happiness. So every diet, every gym membership, every plan touts itself as the holy grail, the solution to all of our problems. And the big issue with that is that marketing does what it's intended to do, which is keep us in the cycle of needing or wanting the next best thing, the next best solution. So with diet culture specifically, sadly, this means that we tune out our bodies and write off our internal voices, and we end up prioritizing these external claims from the diet industry. And these are claims that science and evidence-based treatment tells us are decidedly false. So at this time of year, I think it feels especially important for us to really ground ourselves in our values and practice drowning out the noise of diet culture and kind of practicing that return to trusting our bodies. We know that diet culture makes us distrust our own bodies and their cues. The diet industry is worth $72 billion for a reason, and that's because it keeps people coming back for profit. Eating is something that is individualized to every person, and so what works for one person isn't going to work for everyone else. Sadly, the diet industry knows that their diets are going to fail, right? Their model is set up to profit off of that by making you feel like you just can't do it right, or you haven't found the right thing. And you have to admit from a marketing perspective, it's a pretty good gimmick, right? Because so many of us spend so much time in our lives trapped in that kind of rat race where we're fighting our bodies, we're fighting our mental health and really trying to do the right thing or find the thing that works for us. And so we're going to talk a lot today about marketing and all of these external voices and how to really turn inward and to drown out that external noise and kind of make decisions based on your body and your intuition and how to maintain that long term. So this quote on the screen is one of my favorites when I'm talking about diet culture because I think it's just so pertinent. So I'm going to read it aloud. It's a little long, but I think it helps to hear it read aloud. So eat 5 small meals per day and run. Also, eat only breakfast and dinner and walk. Eat lots of protein and lift, and don't do any cardio because it's bad for your joints. Also, don't eat too much protein and make sure you're sleeping a lot. But don't be sedentary. Don't be too active. It's bad for your blood pressure. Make sure you replace all of your lost salt, but never eat too much sodium. It's easy. Just eat vegetables. Don't eat potatoes, though, or corn. Fruit is obviously good for you, and also it's all sugar and it's bad for you. Sugar, I forgot to mention, is a vital source of quick-burning carbohydrates that your brain needs to survive, and also you should avoid it at all costs. Protein is hurting your kidneys. Make sure you eat a lot of it. Drink water. Never starve yourself unless you're calling it intermittent fasting, and then it's okay to starve yourself a little bit. Don't overhydrate. Being vegan is obviously the healthiest lifestyle, and also, no, it's not. Fish is obviously super good for you, and it's full of mercury and it's killing you. Get some sun every day for vitamin D and skin cancer. So this piece that is, I think I got from Google Images, but I use pretty frequently, it just lays out so well the contradiction that the contradictory messages that we're getting from every angle. So we have people telling us, do this, no, don't do that, do this instead. Everybody has the next right solution, the next right answer, the next thing that's going to change your life. And so because we're getting bombarded with that from all angles, we really have to learn how to turn inwards, tune into our bodies, and advocate for ourselves when we're just stuck in this chaos of, conflicting messaging. So one of my favorite models, and the model that I speak about most often, is called Health at Every Size. And this is something that has been really helpful for me personally, for many of my clients, for many of our patients at Eating Recovery Center, in really grounding themselves in recovery and learning to turn inward from all of this external noise, and to really trust their body, to let go of the shame that comes from being in a body that you're told is not worthy, is not good, is not the norm, and letting go of that shame to really help ground you in your recovery. So we're going to talk a little bit briefly about what Health at Every Size is and is not. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about Health at Every Size. And the first one of those is that Health at Every Size is healthy at any size. This is probably the most common misconception that I hear about Health at Every Size, or HAES, as you'll hear me refer to it throughout the rest of the presentation. HAES actually does not endorse that people are healthy at any size, because we're acknowledging that health goes beyond body size. So we're acknowledging that health is multifaceted, and that people of all sizes have the ability to pursue health in ways that are meaningful to them. We're not going to say this person at this weight is healthy, this person at this weight is unhealthy. We're going to actually examine people's behaviors and lives, and where they're coming from, socioeconomic status, all of these different things that impact the way that they show up in the world and interact with folks in the world. The other thing that HAES is not is ignoring people's health. So the purpose of Health at Every Size is truly to promote overall health and well-being in a patient-centered, evidence-based way. So we want to look at the research. We want to know, how can we help people achieve health if that's their goal? And what's the best way to do that? Because for a long time, we've been told that the best way to achieve health is to manage or control your weight, to lose weight. And really what we know from a lot of the Health at Every Size research is that health is so separate from weight in many ways, and that there are many ways that someone can pursue health if they choose to, that have nothing to do with body size or the number on the scale. Health at Every Size is also not just for people of size. So people of all shapes and sizes are harmed by the way that our culture focuses on weight control and the thin ideal. And so because of that, because people of all shapes and sizes are harmed by those things, people of all shapes and sizes benefit from Health at Every Size principles, because the goal of Health at Every Size is to advocate for change in the way our culture thinks about weight and health. Health at Every Size, finally, is not telling people to do whatever they want. So HAES is an evidence-based health promoting behavior model. So the goal is not to ignore health, but again, to move towards internal rather than external cues in order to promote overall wellness for folks. So what Health at Every Size is a framework for understanding the role that dieting and weight stigma play in the development of medical problems. It's a social justice model that promotes balanced eating, life-enhancing physical activity, also known as intuitive eating and joyful movement, and most importantly, respect for body diversity, acknowledging that folks of all shapes and sizes have existed for millennia. And it's the acknowledgement that health is multifaceted, and that pursuing health behaviors rather than weight loss is actually the evidence-based method to improve both physical health, physical health markers and holistic health. So we're talking body, mind, and soul. So there are 5 main principles of health at every size. I'm going to run through them really quickly for you. They are weight inclusivity, which is accepting and respecting the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes, and rejecting the idealizing or pathologizing of specific weights. So we're saying people of all shapes and sizes have existed for millennia, and you can't tell somebody's health status by looking at their body. Pretty simple. Health enhancement means that we support health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services. And personally, we have practices that improve human well-being, and that includes paying attention to individual physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. For respectful care, as a provider, it's my job to acknowledge my biases and to work to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, and weight bias. I am providing information and services from an understanding that things like socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and all of the other identities that we carry both impact and are impacted by weight stigma. And so it's my job as a provider to support environments that address these inequities. So I can't sit in the therapy room with folks who are struggling and completely ignore the impact of weight stigma or diet culture in the room with them. I have to be doing advocacy work and, really getting into the trenches with folks. It's a matter of, not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. And that's something that, as someone who's not a provider, you deserve that from your providers. And as providers, we have a responsibility to be doing those things. So, I'm moving too far on my slides, I apologize. So, the last 2 principles of health at every size, eating for well-being and life-enhancing movement, like I mentioned earlier, these are often called intuitive eating and joyful movement. You might hear those terms interchanged. These are 2 that are obviously often difficult for folks with eating disorders, and that is because truly, for a lot of folks that I connect with, they don't feel like intuitive eating and joyful movement are things that are accessible to them. And so I always like to share with folks that, if you have a history of eating disorders or disordered eating, these things might feel very out of reach and very far away for you. And that's okay. I think it's part of acknowledging that, recovery is a journey and that there's a certain point at that journey where this becomes more accessible or less accessible to you, and that you should be in communication with your treatment team or with those around you in order to make sure that it's the right time in your recovery and you have the right support in order to implement things like intuitive eating and joyful movement. So the goal of intuitive eating or eating for well-being is to promote flexible, individualized eating that's based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and also pleasure, rather than following any sort of externally regulated eating plan focused on weight control or weight loss. And so I'm sure you can see how having support of professionals is crucial in implementing that, because sometimes we don't have hunger cues. Sometimes we don't know what fullness feels like. And sometimes we, don't know much about nutrition, or we're overly focused on nutrition. We forget that food is meant to be something that brings us pleasure. So it's helpful to have support as you're trying to implement this particular principle in your life. Similarly to that, life-enhancing movement or joyful movement means that we are supporting physical activities that allow people of different sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. So we're saying you don't have to move your body, but if you want to move your body, you should think about what feels good. What are you able to do? We want to make sure that you have access to joyful movement that you find enjoyable, that's easy for you to do or challenging for you to do, depending on your preference, and that you can choose how often or not often to engage in that movement. So health at every size is really a framework where we can begin to understand the impact of weight stigma on health and on quality of life, and then what we should do about that. And we'll bring this back around to the new year in just a moment. So in the treatment of eating disorders, health at every size is really pivotal because it provides us this really compassionate, social justice-based framework to understand and unpack systems of power. So we have macro and micro systems of power that contribute to the development and maintenance of eating disorders. And there can be significant genetic and neurobiological predispositions that play a role, but we're going to talk more about systemic environmental factors today. So we're talking about media, advertising, family systems, all of these things that can help develop and maintain someone's eating disorder. So a macro example of a system of power would be institutionalized fat phobia or weight stigma, which is born out of racism. And then a micro system of power would be like intergenerational fat phobia. So what we learn from our families or our friends and our roles within those family and friends systems, and then how we make meaning about our bodies based on that. Another reason that health at every size is so crucial to eating disorder treatment is because it can help target somatically based complex trauma, which is something that develops often out of weight stigma. So there are two kinds of weight stigma. We have externalized and internalized weight stigma. So externalized is going to be societal bias towards people in larger bodies. This happens all over the world in all sorts of different situations, but the three kind of areas that I like to focus on because most people access them are healthcare, employment, and education. So we know that many physicians associate larger bodies with poor hygiene, noncompliance, hostility, dishonesty, and a lack of self-control. They spend less time with larger body patients in the room, and they're less inclined to order diagnostic tests when indicated. So you can see how that would impact both someone's inclination to go to the doctor and also the quality of the care that they receive. In employment, people in larger bodies are more likely to have difficulty finding and keeping employment. They experience lower wages for the same jobs or performance, and they have lower promotion prospects than their counterparts. So it's harder for us to get jobs, keep jobs, and be paid fairly, and then also to move vertically within those career paths. In education, we know that children in larger bodies often experience peer rejection in the school environment. And so what we see is that before children start kindergarten, they rate their self-esteem pretty high. And then after they go into the school environment, if you have them rate their self-esteem again after entering the school environment, self-esteem is shown to be lowest among overweight children who believe that they're responsible for their weight and who believe that their weight is the reason that they have fewer friends or have been excluded from games and sports. So we can see that as young as kindergarten age, children are experiencing this external weight stigma about their body and are taking that and making meaning about their bodies and their selves based on that. And that's where we get internalized weight stigma. So internalized weight stigma is weight-based attributions that are made about the self, and they're typically dramatically impacted by the lived experience of externalized weight stigma. And so, you know, understanding the way that we internalize these interactions and this weight stigma that folks experience, and then how that impacts our lives is really important, especially when we're talking about the media and advertising and taking in all this information about how our bodies are wrong and we need to change them. And here's the next, you know, best thing to change them. And this is going to be successful if you do it right. You know, we have to understand that this is a macro system of power, right? This is weight stigma at play where, you know, when we internalize that, we have an increased risk of things like hypertension, eating disorders, metabolic syndrome, depression, diabetes, cortisol reactivity, and weight gain. So in fact, a lot of the health problems that I just named are often attributed solely to being in a larger body, when in fact we know that weight stigma is just this huge confounding variable that most people in a larger body have experienced, have internalized, have made you know, meaning about themselves based on that, and therefore, because of that stigma, directly have increased risk of all sorts of medical problems that are often attributed solely to their weight. So weight stigma is a form of complex trauma, and that's really important when we're talking about these experiences that are repeated over and over and over again. So weight stigma is a pervasive re-traumatization for people of size, and it's a form of complex trauma because it's present in multiple settings, it occurs repeatedly over time, and it increases that internalization and that meaning making about our bodies that leads to negative self-talk and self-image. And so because of this complex trauma that we're constantly exposed to, we have a trauma response, which is to change or hide the body. And that's really where these kind of New Year's marketing tactics come in and kind of get their claws in us, because we are the victims of complex trauma and we're feeling unsafe in our bodies, we're feeling unsafe in public spaces, we don't want to interact with other people because we're afraid of rejection, shame, judgment. You know, this is really, really common. I talk with clients about this all the time where, you know, a bullying incident in first grade is preventing, you know, them from forming healthy adult relationships because of the meaning that they have made about these comments about their body, just kind of over and over and over again throughout the years. And I think specifically when we're talking about the eating disorder realm, patients often fear treatment, even just regular medical treatment, going to their primary care doctor. They fear that's going to echo the stigma that they felt in so many other areas of their lives. And so I think the thing to be aware of with complex trauma is that we want to avoid trauma. We want to avoid repeated trauma. And so the things that we do in order to try and prevent re-traumatization, that's a very vulnerable space to be in. And like I said, that's really where this New Year's marketing comes in and kind of gets its claws in us, because if you're in a larger body and you're just surrounded by all of this New Year's marketing and, you know, pressure to make a New Year's resolution and feeling like you are not wonderful exactly as you are, exactly as your body is, that you can accept your body and who you are just the way you are. We're really setting ourselves up, or rather the world is setting us up to be in a space to be perfectly vulnerable to a very skilled marketing tactic. So knowing this potential trauma that we can have, we can experience living in larger bodies, we're going to talk a little bit about how that shapes our experience of the new year. So New Year's resolutions are one of the most common experiences that people have in January. I think most people can relate to this pressure to create resolutions or set goals for the coming year. So just a little bit about the history of resolutions. A resolution is a firm decision to either do or not do something, and they go back more than 4,000 years. I think, they're really intended as a way to reflect upon past years or the past year and resolve, that word, resolve, resolution, resolve to do better in the future. I don't know about you, but that word resolve brings up some feelings for me. Resolve is such a rigid word to me. Resolve is, it's very stoic, it's very harsh. And that's what I think of when I think of New Year's resolutions. Something that I've been considering this year is, with setting New Year's resolutions, are we participating in hustle culture? Are we basing our value on our productivity, on our ability to achieve, on our ability to be perfect, which no one is? Hustle culture says that you can achieve perfection if you work hard enough. And ironically, diet culture says the same thing, but they change the method every time. So, in one decade, they're promoting one type of diet. The next decade, oh, that didn't work, that's your fault, here's a new kind of diet. And I think that it's something to consider when we think about the rigidity of, I think, typical New Year's resolutions, or stereotypical New Year's resolutions. So when we're looking at, well, what do you do if you're not going to make a resolution? And some people are not into New Year's resolutions, but if you're someone who makes them and you're thinking like, well, what else are we supposed to do? Like, how else do we hold ourselves accountable? What are we going to do about that? We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I don't know about you, but I have seen 7 billion Hulu ads for diet products or programs in the last 3 weeks, while I'm just, enjoying my Saturday night trying to watch a true crime documentary. It seems that they're everywhere. And I think that the whole point of this is to convince you that this company or this product has found the one right way to be well. It's big T or capital T truth. They have all the answers, and you have a deficit if you're not using their product or service to just be the most well. And this is what reminds me of hustle culture. Here's what you have to do. You have to run as fast as you can, metaphorically, through the journey of life, and you have to do the exact right thing. You have to be the most well. It's kind of this like rat race mentality that's so common in hustle culture. Sadly, that's the whole point of advertising. When I entered college at the University of North Carolina, I wanted to be in marketing. That was my major. I wanted to be in marketing. And so I was taking entry-level public relations and marketing classes. And what I learned in those classes is that the goal is to convince the consumer that they need your product. And if they don't have it, then they're missing out, or they're worse off for that. And most companies do this by elevating themselves above the consumer and positioning themselves as the expert. And so it really creates this power dynamic of, I know the right thing to do here. And if you're not doing it, then, you're going to be left behind, or you're less worthy. This is visible in most diet product or service ads because they target this like historical falling off the wagon. So have you been trying to lose weight for years? Have you never been able to keep the weight off? They promote their secret to success, and they really get you at that point of vulnerability by manipulating that power dynamic that they have the secret, they know the answer, and you don't. And unfortunately, this removes you as the expert of your experience. So all that does is provide fuel for shame and doubt. And one of the most sad things to me is that we're driving profit based off of us hating ourselves, or thinking that our bodies are bad or wrong for being however they naturally are. So companies are literally making money off a product or a service that they know does not work. So their financial models are based on you as the consumer continuing to invest in these programs because you feel like you failed or you don't have the willpower, when in actuality, the success statistics were against you from the beginning. You are not the problem. So we know that diets are not sustainable long-term. They don't work for the majority of people. And they also come with a significant risk of developing disordered eating or an eating disorder. And so I think it's really important. I'm going to leave this slide with this quote from my colleague, Dr. Paredes. You are not obliged to experience your body in the ways that they want you to. So as we're being bombarded by all of this marketing, by all of these ads that are telling us your body is bad, your body needs to change, you always need to be improving, here's the next best thing, I want you to try and remember that. You are not obliged to experience your body in the ways that other people want you to, and that includes marketing. So how do we set boundaries with resolutions? What do we do if we don't want to set these rigid resolutions, if we don't want to play into this idea that we have to be in hustle culture and run the rat race and feed right into that point of vulnerability? So I would like to encourage you to set relational, expansive resolutions. And I prefer the word intention, so you'll hear me use those interchangeably. But instead of evaluating or comparing your last year's performance and then punishing yourself for that by saying, we have to be better, we have to, cut out all of this, or we have to do this every day, I want you to ask yourself, what can bring me more connection with my relationships or my values? What can I add to my life that's going to expand it rather than shrink it, which is what rigidity does, right? Our world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And those of you with an eating disorder or a history of disordered eating probably know that feeling. The walls are closing in on you. Your life has become very small as the eating disorder kind of takes hold. So when we think about intentions, when we think about setting boundaries with resolutions, how can we expand that? How can we create new relationships? How can we deepen existing relationships? How can we try new things? How can we add more into our lives? The other thing that I want you to ask yourself is this resolution or intention being made from a place of internal cues or external cues? So am I going to feel shame if I don't do this resolution successfully or perfectly? Am I going to feel like I'm failing, like I'm letting someone down, like I can't get anything right? If those are feelings that you're having as you're setting intentions or resolutions for this year, I would encourage you to pause and sit with that and consider if that really feels like it's in line with your values. Internal cues for intentions or resolutions should feel good. Again, they should feel expansive. They should feel like deepening relationships, adding more to your life, including more joy in your life, rather than cutting things out or sticking to something really rigid. So we want to make sure we're turning inside for those cues. We also want to make sure that those resolutions or intentions are flexible. So we want to be kind to ourselves. And I think this is a sticky point for a lot of people, but we want to be a little vague, right? So New Year's intentions or New Year's resolutions could and should be a little vague, because the more stringent we are and the more specific we are, often the more room we have to feel like we failed. Where if my intention for this year is to reach out to folks that I used to be really close with and just we've lost a little bit of touch, I can't fail at that. As long as I reach out at some point, I can't fail at that. Where if I say, I'm going to call an old friend twice a week for the entire year, I'm probably going to fail at that because we get busy and we get tired. And that's the thing about being human, is that we need to build in that space for us to have a bad day, to not do everything perfectly, to not always act in alignment with our values. And the way that we do that is by setting those more vague intentions. And I think too, with intentions, something that can be really helpful is a social media clean out. So unfollowing accounts that promote things that aren't in line with your values. So that could be weight loss, could be diet culture, that set rigid boundaries for themselves or others. And I say that not to say that boundaries are bad, but if someone is particularly rigid, it might not be the best media content for you to be taking in if you're trying not to be as rigid with yourself. And then of course, clean out any social media or relationships that make you feel bad about yourself. You don't need to be surrounded by people or media that makes you feel anything less than good about yourself. Let's talk about shame. So shame plays a huge role in the creation of resolutions, because essentially when we are operating from a place of shame and we're looking at this new year and saying, what am I going to do with this new year? Oftentimes those resolutions that come out of that are going to support the belief that you're not enough and you need to do more or be more. And so when those resolutions don't go exactly as planned, we shame spiral. And so what is really important here is to combat shame when we're looking forward. And I miswrote the year here, but in 2022. And we need to look at, where do we want to put our energy? Do we want to put our energy towards changing who we are or accepting who we are? Or do we want to challenge the belief or message that we're not enough? Where do we want to put our energy? I think, looking at shame, which a person who is steeped in shame feels like, I have to change who I am. I have to be better. I have to get this right. Where someone not operating from a place of shame would say, this is who I am. I don't need to do anything to be worthy. I don't need to change to be worthy. I don't need to be better to be worthy. I'm worthy as I am. And so we can do that by setting intentions, because intentions are what are going to challenge the belief or the message that you're not enough. Intentions prioritize your values and stepping out of your comfort zone. And so again, they expand your life rather than limit it, which is really the goal. Using values to create intentions is something that I really love to do. So if anybody is familiar with ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, you'll be familiar with a value sort. And so you can find lots of resources online if you've never done one, or if you'd like to do one, you can just type in value sort, and you'll find lots of websites where they'll have the values written on cards, and you can just kind of go through and pick out your top values. I usually encourage people to start with 10 and then to narrow down to 5 so that you really kind of have these guiding principles. So values are statements about what we want to be doing with our life, about what we want to stand for, and how we want to behave on an ongoing basis. They're leading principles that can guide us and motivate us as we move through life. So knowing what your values are as we're creating intentions will help you create intentions that are going to expand your life. They're more impactful in our lives because they're more attainable. And if these are your values and you're choosing intentions in line with those, that's going to be so much easier to integrate into your daily life and to feel very aligned and cohesive with the direction that you're wanting your life to go, rather than kind of having these like arbitrary goals and deadlines. This is really getting in touch with these internal cues and saying, who am I? What do I want out of life? What is important to me? And what intentions can I set for the next year in order to integrate that more fully into my life? So I've got a couple of tools for you all as you try to navigate like January diet talk, January resolution messaging. It's a lot to deal with. One of the most difficult things I think to deal with is intrusive thoughts. And so one of the best tips that I have for navigating intrusive thoughts is to follow the thought all the way through. So just for example, let's say that, you're scrolling through Facebook one day and someone that is posting about their weight loss or about the diet that they're on, and you start to have intrusive thoughts like, maybe I should go on a diet, maybe I need to lose weight, and you're really suffering with those thoughts and struggling with those thoughts. One thing you can do to follow the thought all the way through is to think about, how have diets made you feel historically? What has the outcome been? How have they made you feel about yourself? How have they made you feel about, your life, your body, all of these things? And are they aligned with your recovery values? Is that feeling aligned with your recovery values? Distraction activities can also be really helpful here. So when you're having intrusive thoughts, thinking of something else you can do to keep your brain busy. So that could be reading, watching TV, playing a game, meditating, calling a friend, just anything to kind of help the moment pass without really kind of obsessing on those intrusive thoughts. Another thing that you can do is make sure that you're setting boundaries. So consider with January diet talk, how much energy do I have? Like if you're in a social event and somebody is talking about their weight loss or their diet, and that's feeling really difficult for you in your recovery, if you have a lot of energy, you might want to engage that person and say, this conversation is really difficult for me. Can we talk about something else? Or that conversation is not helpful for me. I'm actually in recovery from an eating disorder, or I'm struggling with an eating disorder. If you feel like sharing that. So just high energy, you might want to engage and assert your boundary. If you're feeling low energy, sometimes we're just tapped out and we don't have the ability to engage with someone, especially if we feel like they might not be receptive to that. And so I like to say, if you have low energy, you should retreat and regulate. So you might need to excuse yourself to the bathroom. You might need to, leave entirely. You might need to just switch the conversation topic. You have to decide what works for you in that moment. Another thing that's helpful is opposite action. So opposite action is a DBT skill for emotion regulation, and it can be really helpful when you're feeling bombarded or pressured by lots of diet culture messaging or by intrusive thoughts. And so the first step for that is going to be to identify the emotion that you're having. So let's say that you have plans to go eat dinner with friends and you're having kind of an intense reaction to that. If you can pause and think like, are you scared? Are you sad? Are you anxious? Are you feeling isolated, self-conscious, pessimistic, tearful, kind of what's happening for you? And then I want you to identify your urge to act. So let's say I'm planning to go out to dinner with friends and I'm feeling really intense emotion. And I pause for a second and I identify like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling scared. And so then my urge to act might be like, the anxiety might feel so intense that I want to cancel plans and stay home. And so you need to ask yourself, does your emotion fit the facts of the situation? So fear or anxiety fits the facts whenever there is, for example, a threat to your life or someone you care about, your health, or that of someone you care about, your well-being, or that of someone you care about. And so an example where the emotion fits the situation might be having like anxiety or fear when you're walking home at night, because that motivates us to be aware of our surroundings. It serves a purpose. Anxiety about eating dinner with friends, motivating us to cancel plans, stay home, isolate, that doesn't really match the facts of the situation. And it's not in response to a tangible threat. And so over time, if we, give into that anxiety or avoidance, it can make things worse. And so in that situation, if your emotions and your urges don't fit the situation, we want to do the opposite. So we want to commit to the opposite in our thoughts, our words, and our actions. So choosing opposite action is operating from our wise mind rather than our emotional mind. Another example, kind of going back to the social media example from earlier with a Facebook friend posting about their weight loss or diet, there's an action that would fit the facts of the situation, which would be to take a step back, remove ourselves from the situation, like plan to stay off social media for a specific amount of time until we kind of start to regulate and calm. Or we could choose to take in more positive social media that day. That action that would fit the facts of the emotion in that case would be like feeling angry and wanting to yell at that person, or like leave an angry comment and kind of just really give into that intense wave of emotion that happens, where we could choose to do the opposite because those feelings that we're feeling aren't really based off of a tangible threat. Another thing to consider is setting the values-based resolutions that we've talked about. So doing the DBT values sort, expanding your life, what brings you joy, peace, comfort, connection, and choosing intentions that go along with those things. A couple of other things here. So giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. So ditching the good and bad food dichotomy by using neutral language with food. Letting go of perfection and acknowledging that we can't all be perfect all the time, and that it's normal, not just okay, but normal and common for us to not be perfect. Getting personal and thinking about what your food rules are, and get curious about it. Why do I feel that way? Does it expand or shrink my life? How does it expand or shrink my life? Asking yourself if you're making choices about food based on trying to achieve health or fitness, or are you considering things like hunger, satiety, satisfaction, joy, pleasure, energy, taste preference, texture preference, all of these different things, rather than just like, is this on plan or not on plan? And then acknowledging fat phobia. So we want to be aware that being aware is the first step to being able to create change. So if you can call out eating disorder thoughts or behaviors as fat phobic, if you can be aware of fat phobia around you, you can bring awareness to your values and consider other options in those scenarios. Perfection is a mask that we use to avoid sharing our authentic selves. So we fear that our authentic selves aren't good enough or they'll be rejected. And when we lean into authenticity, when we set these value-based intentions for ourselves, when we combat diet talk with these really authentic versions of ourselves, we're living our values and we're expanding our lives rather than shrinking our lives to fit behind this mask of who we think we should be. I don't know if we have many professionals on this talk, but just want to throw out some professional tools in case anybody finds them helpful. Using grounding exercises with clients, doing the DBT value sort. You know, we really have to show extra compassion to clients this time of year because it's tough. Like, we're all being bombarded with this marketing. We're all feeling overwhelmed with it. And, you know, we need to acknowledge that none of us, and that includes providers too, are immune from all of this January weight and body talk and pressure to create resolutions and be your best self. So it's important to acknowledge that with your clients. It's also important to acknowledge body privilege with your clients if you have it. And so sometimes that sounds like, you know, if you're in a smaller body saying like, I know that I live in a body that society thinks is good or acceptable, and I haven't experienced necessarily what it's like to live in a body that is deemed less than, but I'm committed to addressing weight bias, weight stigma, and both personally and professionally, and I'm here to support you in your journey. Having that conversation and saying like, I don't necessarily know what it's like for you, but I'm here to sit with you through that and to help support you and figure out, you know, how to help you in that journey. That is a really crucial part of professional role in that. So a couple of other things for professionals here. Most folks are familiar with the Intuitive Eating Workbook. And acknowledging privilege and biases are super important as well. Essentially, too, the thing that I want you to hear if you're not a provider is that the message of all of this whole talk, is not anti-weight loss or anti-dieter. It's anti-diet. So it's anti this system of power that profits off of our vulnerability. And it's embracing the concept that health doesn't have a look. Here are some resources. I will leave this slide up if you would like to either screenshot or write down things. On the left, we have social media accounts that can be really helpful if you're in recovery or just looking for fat positive, body positive, recovery positive pages. And then on the right, we have some podcasts and books. So I will leave this up, and then I think we have some questions to run through.
Yes, thank you so much, Meredith. That was amazing. So a few people wrote in about the idea of SMART goals and flushing those out. And someone said, when it comes to resolutions, how do you find the most helpful balance between keeping intentions vague and setting SMART goals? So can those SMART goals feel too rigid for somebody who might have an ED history? And kind of this idea of how can we do that differently?
Sure. I think the biggest question to ask yourself, because I totally understand. I mean, I grew up hearing all about SMART goals and that acronym and how that's the best way to achieve your goals. And I think a lot of us heard that growing up. And so I really relate to that. But I think the question to ask yourself, if you're trying to have that piece of like accountability to yourself or to a timeline or to a frequency of something, is to consider how you're going to feel if you don't achieve that. So if I say, you know, I would like to move my body 3 times a week. If I don't do that, if I don't move my body at all 1 week, or I move my body 1 time 1 week, or I don't move my body for 6 weeks, am I going to feel like I failed? Or am I going to feel like, oh, this is just something to shoot for, and if I don't always make it, or if I never make it, that's okay. It's not a big deal. I can have compassion for myself, or even honor the fact that I made different choices that were more in line with what I needed in that moment. I think that's much more important. So that can help if you're trying to balance that, like, how do I decide, you know, between SMART goals, or how do I kind of like integrate SMART goals with intentions or resolutions? That's what I would encourage you to think about, is how can I set intentions or resolutions with some of that structure, is to ask, you know, how am I going to feel if I don't meet that goal? And how can I adjust it to make sure that I'm not going to feel like I failed, or that I'm not going to feel shame if I don't achieve that?
Great. Thank you so much for helping us kind of flesh that out a little bit more. Gonna throw a big question at you that might actually need to be its own talk, but thought it might be helpful. So in the beginning, when we were talking about weight stigma, you mentioned that the concept that weight stigma is really born out of racism. And I was just wondering if you could dive into that a little bit more and kind of help us flesh that out.
Totally. So, and that absolutely could be its own talk. You're exactly right. So really, I mean, if anybody here has read Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, she talks at length about the intersection of racism and fat phobia, and really where bodies of color and fat bodies become the other, and then not just other, but less than. And so that really starts with folks of color, and kind of bleeds in to other folks who are in larger bodies. And so I think it's really heartbreaking to understand the way that eating disorders can be disorders of acculturation. So for a lot of folks of color who have eating disorders, the goal of their eating disorder isn't always to be thin, but it is to acclimate to dominant culture or white culture. And that is something that when you're working with clients of color, understanding that like the goal is not this ideal body, the goal is to be accepted and not othered and not marginalized and all of these things. Like as we start to understand the intersection of what that means for bodies and for bodies of color, I think it's very, very entangled. And I don't think we can talk about one without talking about the other.
I think, yeah, that is incredibly important for people really to just recognize that last piece, that they're intertwined and we can't separate them. So thank you for that. One last question, since we just have a few minutes left. How can someone support their friend who is talking negatively about their body or wanting to set resolutions that are body or weight based? So just kind of tips on how we can be good support systems for those around us.
Totally. I think sometimes what's helpful is to just be a listening ear. Sometimes it's helpful to pretend you're a fly on the wall and what's happening doesn't impact you, and just kind of be that sounding board for that person and let them work out some of their own stuff with you. But also I think it's really helpful to ask our friends like how that's going to make them feel. So like, I hear that you're really excited about, setting this resolution to exercise 6 times a week. Is that, how do you think that's going to impact your life? Like, do you feel like you're going to have time for all of the other things that you love? Do you feel like you're going to have the energy for that? What are you most excited about with that? And kind of really getting curious with that person about what they're hoping to accomplish from this, because so often intentions or resolutions that are related to food, our body, exercise, there's something deeper underneath that. So whether that's a fear of not being accepted, whether it's, wanting to try and control something that we can control when so many things are out of our control, kind of asking those questions, not to be your friend's therapist, but just to really get to know them and what they're looking to do. And, if you feel comfortable to provide the feedback and say, wow, that sounds like it would be really exhausting. I would struggle to do that 6 days a week. I'm like a 2-day a week person, or, kind of having that conversation of how can we ask our friends how they're feeling and check in on them and kind of not hold them accountable, but help them reflect on their values and their intentions, and if those things are aligned, or if they're misaligned, and we can have a gentle conversation about that.
Thank you so much. I feel like that's really beautiful, and just the concept of curiosity and really how far that can go if we get curious